In the bleak November of 865, when the first hard frosts silvered the salt marshes of the Thames estuary, and the monks of Canterbury were still chanting the office of the dead for King Ethelbert of Kent, who had been murdered by his own bodyguard only months before, a fleet of longships so numerous that the chroniclers wrote their masts were like a forest upon the sea, dropped anchor off the Isle of Thanet under the black raven banners of the sons of the half-legendary Ragnar Lodbrok, Halfdan Ragnarsson the broad-shouldered berserker, Ivar the Boneless, whose twisted legs belied a mind sharper than any sword, and whose cruelty would become the terror of 3 kingdoms, and Ubba, the shadowy third brother, whose very name struck dread in the Anglo-Saxon heart, and with them came thousands upon thousands of hardened Danish and Norwegian warriors, men who had wintered on the frozen fjords, who had raided Frisia and Francia, who had learned that the divided kingdoms of England were rich in silver, weak in unity, and ripe for conquest, and so they landed on Thanet not as raiders, but as settlers of doom, building a fortified camp of turf and timber, slaughtering the local sheep for winter meat, and sending messengers across the Channel for more ships, more men, more iron, while the kings of Wessex, Mercia, East Anglia, and Northumbria, each jealous of the others, each too proud to bow, each too slow to act, watched from afar and did nothing. And in that single winter on Thanet, the Great Heathen Army was born, a force that would in 9 terrible years destroy the kingdoms of Northumbria, East Anglia, and half of Mercia, carve out the Danelaw that would endure for 2 centuries, and leave a mass grave at Repton, where 250 Viking warriors were buried with their axes, their shields, and the bones of the kings they had broken. And the story begins not with a battle, but with a winter of waiting, of sharpening blades, of forging mail, of listening to the skalds sing of Ragnar's death in the snake pit of King Ælla of Northumbria, and the blood oath sworn by his sons to avenge their father with fire and steel. And when the spring of 866 came, the ice broke on the Thames, and the raven banners moved inland, and the Anglo-Saxon world would never be the same again. The first kingdom to fall was Northumbria, already torn by civil war between the rival kings Osbert and Ælla, and when the Great Heathen Army marched north in the autumn of 866, they found York, the royal city, its Roman walls crumbling, its gates unguarded, its people more afraid of their own lords than of the pagans. And on November 1st, All Saints' Day, while the bells of the minster were ringing for vespers, Ivar's warriors scaled the walls with ropes and grappling hooks, cut down the sentries before they could sound the alarm, and opened the gates from within. And within hours York was in flames, the minster was looted, the royal palace was stormed, and both Osbert and Ælla were captured alive. And in the market square before the ruined church of St. Peter, Ivar the Boneless, seated on a shield borne by 4 warriors, ordered the blood eagle carved upon King Ælla's back, the ribs broken outward like wings, the lungs pulled out and laid upon the shoulders while the king still breathed, a sacrifice to Odin for the death of Ragnar. And the screams of Ælla echoed through the burning city until the ravens came to feast. And Northumbria, the oldest and proudest of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, was no more. Its royal line extinguished, its treasure shipped back to Denmark, its people enslaved or fled, and the Great Heathen Army wintered in York, repairing their ships, forging new swords from melted church bells, and planning the conquest of the south. In 869, the Raven banners turned east to East Anglia, the kingdom of King Edmund the Martyr, a pious ruler who spent more time in prayer than in training soldiers. And when Ivar and Ubba landed with 20,000 men, the East Anglian fyrd was scattered in a single afternoon at Thetford. Edmund was captured alive, bound to a tree, and used for target practice until his body was a pincushion of arrows, then beheaded, his head thrown into the brambles where it was later found by a talking wolf that guarded it until the monks came. And East Anglia, the breadbasket of England, became a Danish province, its churches burned, its monks enslaved, its silver crosses melted into hack silver, and the Great Heathen Army grew richer, stronger, and more feared with every passing month. By 870, the storm reached Mercia, the largest and most powerful of the remaining kingdoms, ruled by King Burgred, who had married Ethelswith, sister of Alfred of Wessex, and who believed that diplomacy and Danegeld could buy peace. But Ivar the Boneless had no interest in peace, only in land, and in the winter of 873-874 the Great Heathen Army laid siege to Repton, the royal and ecclesiastical centre of Mercia, building a great ditch and rampart around the town, cutting off the Trent. And when the Mercians tried to break out, they were slaughtered in the fields, and after 4 months Burgred fled to Rome with his wife and what treasure he could carry, and Mercia was divided, the eastern half becoming part of the Danelaw, the western half a puppet state under a Danish jarl. And at Repton, the Vikings built a great burial mound over the ruins of the church, and when archaeologists opened it in 1985, they found the mass grave of 250 Viking warriors, men aged 20 to 40, many with battle wounds, buried with their axes, their shields, their gaming pieces, and the disarticulated bones of what may have been Ivar the Boneless himself, surrounded by the charred remains of a sacrificial pyre, proof that the Great Heathen Army was not a myth but a machine of conquest that left its dead in the heart of the land it had taken. Only Wessex remained, and in 878, Alfred the Great would fight the Danes to a standstill at Edington, but that is another story. For 9 years, from 865 to 874, the Great Heathen Army had marched, burned, killed, and settled, erasing 3 of the 4 great Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, creating the Danelaw that would shape English law, language, and blood for 200 years, and leaving behind a landscape of ruined abbeys, emptied villages, and mass graves like the one at Repton, where the bones of Ivar's warriors still lie with their axes, silent witnesses to the forgotten Viking apocalypse that came within a whisker of conquering all of England and changing the course of British history forever.